Oh, hello.
Hello.
Thanks everyone for joining us and watching us chat about poetry. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that I'm broadcasting from the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people in Mianjin, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and future.
And I am broadcasting from Gadigal land. I've lived on this land for 23 years, the whole of my life, so paying immense gratitude, respect, and honour to the knowledges, learnings, and storytellings of Gadigal peoples here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And yeah, obviously, this is a bit last minute that you came in to chat for this event, but we're very excited to, we're very excited to have you.
Thank you. I am very.
This is it. Yeah, me and my curlew are very excited to have you at this event. Very good. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Unfortunately, I'm not Zoe. It's a real shame she couldn't join us today. She's amazing. Definitely, absolutely worth checking out as a person, poet, essayist, fiction writer, and activist as well. Just stellar on all fronts. So yes, I hope I can live up to her reputation and, just knowledge and learning. So thank you so much for having me.
We're all great poets here. But yeah, I guess we should introduce ourselves. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm Lou. I am a poet and editor working on Gadigal land, as I mentioned. I have poems in a few journals now, including Australian Poetry Journal, Overland, something forthcoming in Un magazine, Prison International, which is a Canadian magazine, Liminal, Rabbit, Scum, and VoiceWorks. I also edit for VoiceWorks, and hopefully at some point in this conversation we'll pivot to VoiceWorks just for a couple minutes. I always love to toot their/our horn. Really fantastic magazine.
I love it.
Way.
Yeah, I'm Ray White. My pronouns are they, them. And yeah, I just looked up actually when I first had my first poem published. Apparently that was in early 2016, so that's good. I edit NB Life Journal, which is for non-binary and gender diverse creatives, alongside Alison Evans, who's also part of this festival. I wrote a book called Milk Teeth, which, this is my reading copy. It looks a bit dank, but it's now actually on its second print run, which is extremely cool. And it's a book of poetry about incredibly strange things, including being non-binary and lots of plants. And yeah, I think that's about it. When I was just thinking, like, when did you first start writing poetry? Because I realized that, yeah, like mine was around 2015. Like, I definitely didn't start writing poetry when I was, younger or anything.
Yeah, well, I actually have a pretty kind of defined memory of like entering into kind of more of a poetic space as opposed to like a distinctly, prose one, or not that those are rigid definitions, but the first kind of poem I wrote and published was for VoiceWorks in their Slug edition. And that one was just kind of about, the old things, gender, trauma, but I kind of just dropping that one, I guess. That would have been kind of, I guess, early last year, actually, which is kind of fairly recent. So I'm just in my second years of kind of practice as a writer. And yeah, I guess that experience of, I suppose, just sitting down with a blank page and fashioning something that looked a lot more like poetry than it did anything else was really like a very elastic one. Yeah, which is funny. Like I struggle to think of the precedent for that. Like I had never like intentioned any poetry, kind of like in my writing life before. I was just kind of muddling along. And I think you eventually find yourself in that space where, form is really doing something quite special and unique. But how about you, Ray?
Yeah, that's really interesting actually. Like I think I definitely I hated poetry in like high school, and I don't think I did a writing degree, but I didn't really enjoy poetry at that point either, I don't think. And then I started reading sort of poetry by friends of mine like Zenobia Frost and Beck Jessen, and suddenly I was like, oh, poetry can actually be amazing and queer. And so that was sort of what drew me to it. But I still think that I've got to say, like, even though I'm sort of at a certain point where like I feel like I live and breathe poetry almost, like even things that I do, like, short stories, they're still in some way poetic. I still don't think I could tell you what a poem actually is and what actually defines a poem, because I was thinking about that before this discussion. Like how do we even, what even is a poem?
Yeah, well, I feel like that's such a wonderful and also,
Mm,
really difficult and like oftentimes problematic and like heterogeneous question, like what is poetry? I think that's like such a porous container. And for myself, I feel that poetry is kind of like sitting in the interstices of like what other quite like rigid and defined, often canonical kind of generic structures are offering. So anything that is just kind of, and perhaps this is, kind of like too broad an ambit for poetry, or, maybe we're just kind of existing at, the end of like literature and, and the kind of like existing kind of like at the end of the tether of like all of these different kind of like ontologies and taxonomies that actually don't mean anything. But I think that poetry is really, like, my intuitive sense of that is really the most, kind of latitudinous, flexible, and elastic kind of form of writing
mm,
or literature, whatever that is. And I guess
mm,
that's its appeal as well. I think certainly when I was coming to poetry kind of as a beginner, it was really through those encounters with texts that were like, you know, that were really pushing up against the boundary of what language and kind of like form can accomplish, that I was like, yes, this is something I want to do, and a space I can kind of see myself in. How about you though, Ray? How do you
yeah.
kind of think about poetry and your own practice, I guess?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I think I definitely, like, I sort of learned all the rules, as it were, and then immediately forgot them all. It's very good. Um, but yeah, for me, poetry is something that I think I just love it's the same as the reason I like short stories, is I like the condensed kind of format. And I like the fact that I guess I can speak in a way, and maybe two people in a way that I wouldn't, normally perhaps in some other kind of medium. And I think what drew me to poetry was the fact that it was so incredibly, or is so incredibly flexible. Like, as you were saying, like it's so elastic. Like, uh, you can create a poetry twine, or you can create, I just wrote a verse novel. Like, I didn't do it in 5 seconds. It was many years, but poetry can take so many different forms, and I think that it can even be. I remember I was at a poetry reading once, and someone held up a painting that they did, and they're like, "This is my poem," and I'm like, I'm not going to argue with that. Like, I think that poetry is that flexible and that experimental, and it's no more and no less than just a bunch of enjambments. So, do we have a? Oh, here we go. We have a question. What's your starting advice? What would you tell someone who has never before written a poem and really wants to? Ooh. I mean, definitely read poetry would be like, obviously. I also find that consuming lots of other different mediums is good as well. Like, it can be anything if you like B grade movies, or Animal Crossing. Um, and then, you can write poetry about them. But in terms of, yeah, I definitely think, like, as consume as much poetry as you can. It's not going to be one of those things where I think a lot of people are concerned that if they read certain types of poetry, it'll get into their head and they'll just use that person's voice and be some kind of, I don't know, robot that is taking away the voice of another, and that's absolutely not it. You know, whatever you write is going to be from your voice, and it's, you know, it's going to be awesome. And I think another thing is to just sort of have, I guess, faith in what you're writing. Like, you might have no faith and no kind of ego, but you know, what you write is always going to be incredible at some point. The first draft might not be. My first drafts are awful. But I think once you've got something down on the page, you can always hammer it into, you know, something that's workable, and something that's either for you or something that's submittable, you know, to a publication. What do you think, Lou?
Yeah, well, echoing everything you said, which is really beautiful and so generative, I think just kind of doubling back on that advice of just read as much poetry you can. I remember, you know, kind of like, as I mentioned, you know, my very kind of like first encounters with poetry and kind of like poetic texts so clearly. And I think, you know, I think that's a really common experience in that, you know, you're in a bookshop or you're in the library or you're just kind of like browsing the interwebs, and, you know, you've come across something that you feel you should really obsess over. For me, that was Emily Skyer's Root, which is a really fantastic title by Grey Wolf. I think I was in Nam at one point, had like $20 in my pocket, and read a couple of her poems in the bookstore. And I was like, this is really fantastic. I've never read any poetry before, but this is speaking to me, you know, kind of like in a multitude of ways. And I really started to obsess over Emily Skyer. I read, you know, kind of like every interview, you know, offered online. I've read this book kind of like 3 or 4 times, and I'll read it, you know, 3 or 4 times again, and I'll always find new things in it. And I think once you click into those rhythms of, you know, feeling, you know, totally obsessed and just kind of like potentially even a little bit crazy, and just like almost in love with, you know, 1 or 2 poets. I think that's a really, really generative space for, you know, commencing your own work. I think as well, just that kind of, you know, approaching a blank page and, you know, kind of like feeling like you're going to pantomime or like caricature the authors you love. I feel like for me, just about every first draft I write is also quite shit, but it also sounds like somebody that is not me. Because I'm just so in love with, you know, such a fantastic and diverse array of, you know, wonderful authors. I think the process of kind of writing poetry is disentangling myself from, you know, kind of like those really early references. I think as well, there are just a number of exercises I hope we'll kind of have the opportunity to run through, but kind of I like to find an object or a text or just something in the world that is existing in kind of like a space of rupture, or is holding quite a bit of paradox, or is, you know, emotionally loaded. Like for me, I simultaneously really love and am very attracted to academic texts and language, but am also really repelled by that, because the academy is, you know, just like a place of like deep disgust for me, you know, and exclusion. But I think,
sorry.
Go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, academic text, that's definitely something that, like, I love to mess around with, like, especially taking like medical textbooks and doing things like blackout poetry and those kinds of exercises that kind of will, you know, stimulate maybe more thought processes and more poetic ideas and stuff. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that idea of just kind of like taking something you have a love relationship and really fucking it up. Like you know, like medical texts, or, you know, pieces in academic journals, or even just like definitions of wanky words in the dictionary. I really, really like. And
I started. Sorry.
Oh, go on.
I keep interrupting. I was going to say, I started writing a poem that I'm obsessed with, the way people describe or like review clothing items and how much they either love or hate something. And you know, like they'll be like, yeah, I wore this and like, you know, my boyfriend thought it was sick. And I'm like, that's fantastic and weird. And one person was like, yeah, this fabric is thick with like 3 C's. And like, I'm taking all these, what people have said and I'm going to mash it together. But like, yeah, like found poetry is another thing. But sorry, I was just like, yes, what you said.
No, absolutely. And this may be, kind of like quite unintuitive advice, but like often if I'm having difficulty like starting a poem, or, I want to begin a piece, but not too sure like what language to clothe that in, I like get on Twitter and I just steal other people's stuff. And
yes.
maybe I don't look, I'm saying that the initial act is like stealing, but hopefully at that stage, like I will have transformed it. Like, if it's getting to like a publication stage, or, a space where I'm kind of like sharing that to multiple people, then hopefully by that stage I will have like changed things around and just kind of, reclothed and rejig things to kind of okay and like legal. But look, not saying that I just I think that's a totally legitimate way of kind of going about things. I think also oh no, sorry, go on, Ray.
No, I keep interrupting. I was going to say I also think like I'm trying to find the poem. It's in Beck Jessen's new book, Ask Me About the Future, and it's one. It's a Vote Yes poem that she wrote. That's a found poem of like all of the different like it's various different articles from when there was the vote on marriage equality, and so like. I don't know, sometimes found poems, I'm like, no, I'm just going to actually steal that within reason. Please be careful, everyone.
Totally. I feel like also if you're stealing it, somebody who's shit, or, like something. Yeah, that's totally up for grabs.
Yeah, they're uptight conservatives. Go live your truth. Just check with your publisher and make sure it's okay.
Yes, make sure you keep notes on the document to kind of like, it's often happened that, like you've ended up with a poem that's kind of gone through its 5th or 6th edit, and you know that there's something in there that's been stolen, and it's like, I don't know, like, I don't know where you are, like, but I just really don't want to offend or like, commit a crime. I don't know.
Yes, don't commit any crimes unless be gay, don't do plagiarism crimes.
Yeah.
But I'm so sorry. What were you saying before? I was just like, also, do you want me to raise my hand?
Oh, no worries. I feel like just thinking, I'm assuming that everybody in the audience here is a good person and isn't just going to like willfully steal, like if you have a moral conscience, like I don't think, hopefully it's okay. But also, again, pushing up the legality of, I totally did not expect the conversation to kind of pivot into, this area of like, are we criminals? But like, it's like eavesdropping on people. And like, don't steal the whole, conversation with, like, sense, and like recopy it in, insensitive, potentially like very damning and disclosing kind of ways. But I really, really like just, going out for dinner, or not that you can kind of really do that now, but like sitting on the bus, if that's something you're able to do, or potentially something you're able to kind of rack your memory for, and take just like a few words of what somebody has said, and kind of play with, potentially the syntax, the semantics, pragmatics of that, kind of in ways that feel melodious or potentially, rhythmic to you. And I think kind of most times I've done that and felt that I have material to work with have actually been really generative. Like I published a poem in Overland a few months ago that won second prize in the Judith Wright, which Ray and I,
very good. Twins.
Exactly. So happy. Yeah, so good. But yeah, like that whole poem actually came from just kind of like, I think a couple lines I heard at like a dinner party somewhere. And I think those were like something about something being somebody's problem, but somebody else's solution. So I just kind of like circulated around that idea of like, your problem, my solution, and ended up with like a poem that worked. So yeah, I think
that's really interesting because like I definitely, I'm not sure I would even, I guess I listen to what people say, but I'm like, I kind of like often will go for a wander or like, look at plants and animals and stuff. The other day, like I was like on my balcony, like filming a bee and talking to the bee and being like, hey, do you want to be in a poem? Like, so I find that like just looking at instead of like an object, maybe like a living thing, and describing that and sort of giving it autonomy and or maybe sort of describing it in this kind of strange sort of off-kilter way is sort of, that's something I realize I don't actually listen to that many conversations, but that's something that I do. I just kind of wander off and start looking at stuff.
yeah, that's so beautiful and
Which
potentially
is,
also a little bit less creepy.
oh yeah, no, it's all poets are slightly we have slightly strange things that we do, but I mean I think that's a lot of artists. I was going to say we've got a question about maybe like if we want to. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about like the writing of poetry? Because there's a question about editing as well. So like the next.
Yeah, well, let's flesh that out in the editing stage, and we can bounce back and forth and be fluid about things. Yeah, if you're okay.
I feel like that's totally what it is. Like if I write a poem, then often, yeah, it's a very fluid process. Like I often will chop and change and like not. Gosh, I've got like a whole manuscript of poems that are never going to see the light of day. So that's also a thing to keep in mind. You might write something and go, this is amazing. And then the next day go, oh, no. And that document is something that I like mine for lots of ideas as well. Because there's some gems in there. Some of them are not good.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's also a wonderful kind of, whether you're kind of like at the genesis point of a poem or whether you're just brushing it off and looking for, kind of an extra line or two, just stealing from yourself as well and stealing from the archive you've kind of generated is so, it's such a wonderful and like really gratifying way of doing things too, because then it's like, it kind of feels shitty, although I think we'll probably, bookmark this at some point, that it is a part of the process that, like inviting a lot of failure and, writing poems that will never see the light of day and probably should because they suck. But mind that and take from that is also, fantastic way to start. Or, if you're in the editing phase, kind of top things off.
Exactly.
Let's think about editing our poem.
I got to say, like, definitely with editing, it's something that I have, and I'm not sure if it's because I write things that are a bit more, I guess, experimental or whatever the case may be. They're not exactly sonnets or anything like that. They're not sort of super formulaic. I reckon that I don't know. I still look for a consistency of voice throughout the poem, and I make sure that I've got a consistency of punctuation. Like if I'm using an ellipsis in a weird way, I make sure that that's consistent throughout. But I sort of and I also make sure that, like, in terms of the intention that I have, like if I veer off at a certain point, and the voice or the the speaker or the punctuation or something changes, that is like an intentional thing, and that's something that I either want to ease the reader into or shock them or that kind of thing. I sort of like review those kind of intentions as I go along, but it all seems like kind of airy fairy, because I don't sort of like, even though I guess we're both editors, like I personally don't sort of go through a lot of my work in a very, I don't know, like high school red pen kind of way. I'm a bit more, I don't know, a bit more chill and intuitive, which I don't know how to sort of describe that. What do you find in terms of, because I guess, there's lots of different types of editing,
Well, it's funny you say that, because for me, I am actually very high school red pen. It gets to a point where, suppose I've, kind of I'm sitting with the first draft of a poem. I know it's kind of shit, but I know also I have a feeling that it could be something less shit. And you know, and I guess it's just that kind of thing of, you know, I try to allow like a little bit of latitude in terms of time. Like it's rare that I'll kind of come back to a poem unless I'm pushing up against a deadline, which, you know, we live in, you know, like corporatized capitalist, intensely capitalist kind of structures and environments. Like sometimes you'll just, you know, this is kind of best case scenario, but hopefully I will have left it kind of for 3 or 4 days. And then I'll
I think that's good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at that stage, and the trick is kind of like not to look at it and to give your brain kind of like that very like pragmatic logistic break. So even if you need to think of that in kind of unartistic terms, but, you know, just like neurologically, you just need to let your brain kind of like let go of the memories of having crafted that piece of work. And then
because often I'll go back and go, oh, did I write this? This is quite good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you find gems, and then you'll also find places where it's just like that was real bad. And then you know, kind of what I do is I take all of that text, copy it into a different document, and just kind of go ham on the edits. And you know, I feel that to be an intuitive process for the most part. I guess getting to that second or third edit, the third edit being like literally the same thing over again where I've left it and I'm kind of looking back over it. I try to think through a few questions. The first being, you know, and this is intimidating, but I'm trying to put in language something which is actually like just very much in every poet's head, I think, or every writer's head. Which is like, what is my relationship to language? Am I clear in my relationship to language? Which has a lot to do with consistency, but it's just kind of, have I engineered, you know, language, syntax, words, however you kind of want to formulate or think about it in a way that's compelling, maybe not for somebody else, but compelling for me, because I'm my first audience in those kind of first 2-3 drafts.
I think that's and like I think in terms of you're right about like, and there's also like it's very much about consistency and about you know, if you're evoking a certain image, to have that you know, image of, say, like water, you know, maybe consistent throughout, you know, because someone just asked what should people sort of be looking for, you know, in editing sort of more specifically. And, you know, like I always make sure my punctuation's consistent. It doesn't necessarily have to be correct. And yeah, definitely that kind of thing. Sorry, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just kind of like on the level of consistency, I think it really is just that thing of like, go with your gut. Like if you have a piece and you're like, look, this is really moving me. And I think it's actually, it's also an act of humility to like look at something you've written and be like, you know, parts of this I can actually get quite sentimental about and emotional about. Like, I think, you know, just in your room, just addressing that potential concern, like you can leave, like you can be moved by your own work, I think. Yeah, like in your, you know, for what that means to you or in your private space. And if you're feeling those feelings, try to kind of like locate it within the piece. Like if there are certain lines in a poem, if your poem, you know, is like lineated or, you know, like is more spatial on the page, try and kind of like identify and localize that. So if I have a couple lines that are pulling a lot more weight than the others, I try to kind of think that through. I guess with poetry, my general advice is one piece shouldn't, by and large, really be reliant on the strength of, you know, of one particular section or a few lines or one line or a word. Generally, you know, kind of like ideally once you've kind of thought through everything you've invested in each kind of line, but also, you know, there can be ebbs and flows within that. Like it's not to say that, you know, you might just be like thinking through, you know, like one particular section, you know, may just be like a little bit more attenuated and sitting back and kind of like a little bit less obvious, and there might be others that are just kind of like really hard hitting, which is totally legitimate and valid. But yeah, I think once you've gone through a few stages of that, of putting it aside and coming back and being like, I've done the best I can with the facility that's available to me. I've taken the risks I've felt compelled to take. Like there's kind of like, which is also another way of looking at it. Like there's nothing left in this piece to do. Like there's no more, like the stakes have already been kind of like exhausted, and I've pushed this piece to its limit and maybe like pulled it back because those I was taking weren't really working. Then yeah, I would say at that stage it's time to show your work to a trusted other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's, and like I definitely think that's. I'm just having a look if there's any questions. Yeah, to basically just to show it to someone else, and to also, like, I find reading it out loud to myself as well as something that helps as well in terms of rhythm, and maybe like the sound quality of certain things. But yeah, absolutely. In terms of, I guess, like that's another thing, is community is very important, is finding, some poetry friends, poetry like critique forums, that kind of thing. And oh gosh, there's so many questions. I just saw all these questions pop up and I'm like, oh golly gosh. That's all right. But yeah, what were you going to say in terms of showing it to someone else?
Oh no, well, everything you were saying was so beautiful. Like I think that first of all, just kind of when I started out with poetry, I had I had zero poetry community. And just kind of many friends who were like working in that space of like art/artistry/writing, which is totally okay. I think also, and just plugging VoiceWorks here, there are a couple of magazines in Australia that do offer like feedback services, and and editorial kind of processes that actually verge a little bit more on mentoring and investing as you as a writer, and kind of really working with you to achieve the results you want, which is a really, really fantastic way to generate, an audience and a community as well. If not for VoiceWorks, I think I'd be a lot poorer, like in terms of kind of, community, friends, people I trust with my work. So yeah,
I think that's the same thing in terms of National Young Writers Festival. I found like the first year that I went, like this was, the festival that allowed me to sort of like make friends and make contacts and be like, yes, I want to work with this person in the future, or yes, I'm going to submit to this person's magazine, like that kind of thing. And like create like a whole community of my own. And it's so much easier online now, I guess, to be able to do that. We've got quite a number of questions, and I think we've only got 20 minutes left. So let's do. All right. So
maybe to the beginning of.
Yeah, there's also some, there's a bunch of them. We've got how can younger poetry writers overcome the feeling of not being qualified or fully formed in their poetic responses? I mean, look, I just have the ego of a cis white man, and I find that is, I'm kidding, but also, like, I honestly think that I'm not sure who this person is, but it's highly likely that your poetry is a heck of a lot better than what you think it is. And I'm not saying that an ego is the the thing to look for, but I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing to feel good about your own work. And if you don't feel qualified, maybe look into some courses. There's things like toolkits and various different online courses that you could maybe do. But look, I think that everyone has the potential to be a poet and feel good about their work. There's barriers to entry, but Yeah, you got this, person in the chat. Lou, do you have anything to sort of add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like, that, what constitutes being a writer or someone that's, like working with art is just so gate kept. And to the detriment of people who are, maybe writing incredible stuff, but also maybe at kind of the very beginning of their practice and, are just kind of feeling out, perhaps haven't even put pen to paper and are just kind of like reading with the intention of being like, hey, this is something I really want to do. This is work I also see myself creating. And I think also what Ray was saying, in terms of like, whether, you've just written a few kind of words on, Google Doc, or, something much longer and have a body of work kind of coming along. There is probably a cis white man out there doing a lot less and investing a lot less, and still calling himself a writer and still feeling, kind of qualified and, like robust in his practice enough to, kind of open up all the doors for himself that, kind of like really other people should probably be opening for themselves.
Oh, heck yeah. Like, I'm always like, yes, I'm a writer and artist. Like, even when I like had my first poem published, I'm like, hello, I'm an artist. Like, just go for it. Live your dream.
Exactly. And I think also, just like for the amount of times I have like totally, even as like a published poet now, like the amount of times I totally like crash and burn and send stuff to people and they're like, Lou, no. Like that kind of fear of failure or not being good enough. Like, I think we all experience that. Like I'm willing to bet that someone who's published like 10 critically lauded books of poetry still feels that sense of like imposterism, or, kind of not being qualified or fully formed, in their kind of work. So I think it really just is a thing of taking that leap. And echoing
definitely.
Toolkit's Poetry is just such a wonderful program that I would definitely check out. And also VoiceWorks and everything Express Media does as well really caters to writers at the very beginning of, looking to write. So there are just so many possibilities, and go get them.
Oh, yeah, go get them. Go for it. Like, it's, there's also, I was thinking we might sort of, I'll try and think of some places to pitch to and like send submissions to. But on the note of, like whether or not something's sort of like worth publishing, we've got a question that was, if you're self-publishing a poem, is it harder to decide if it's quote unquote worth publishing? And I think if you're self-publishing, if you're doing it on a blog or a Patreon or whatever, I think it's like zines. Like, I think there is a different barrier to entry. Like, there's basically no barrier to entry. And I think that that doesn't necessarily, it's not a bad thing. I think that it gives you the freedom to like experiment and maybe write something that would, that you wouldn't necessarily pitch anywhere or send anywhere for whatever reason. So I think, in terms of its worth, I don't know, that's a really hard one. I think so long as it's something that you've written that you think that the audience where you're going to self-publish it, like if it's a zine for a zine fair, or if you're going to publish it on your blog and people read it, if you think that that you like it, and if you think that audience may also like it, then I think it's worth publishing. I don't know, what do you think, Lou?
Yeah, no, echoing everything you've said, Ray. I feel that it's a lot about intention. If you've written something for yourself that isn't going to funnel, kind of like very easily, or you would feel uncomfortable with, like the prospect of that, of like having your piece go through potentially like edits from an editor you don't know, is potentially in another state to you, or, another country, who knows. And then, you're going to be paid your however much money for that, and it's going to exist in kind of like a space of like public commons for everyone to kind of interact with and consume. If the idea of that is not sitting right with you, and you're having that gut feeling that like, no, this is art I created for myself. This is something I want to have kind of quite a great deal of autonomy over in terms of like the means of production and consumption, or I just want to put it out there because I want it to be on the internet, or I want it to be kind of like in a book form that is not like attached to a publisher or like a monetary value. Then absolutely follow that impulse, because that is no less legitimate than following those traditional publishing routes.
And I think that reminds me of like there's a couple of questions that in terms of like using open mics for testing out your work, and also like sharing your bad poetry. Yeah, like if that, as you said, like if that sits right with you, then go for it. Like if you want to try something at an open mic, go for it. If you want to, publish poetry on, I don't know, your blog, on Tumblr, I forgot that's a thing. And you want to share that, if you want to share it in a forum, then yeah, absolutely. Like that's, like I think that's always a good testing ground. And, you can get feedback, or, like it's something that, you can see for yourself, like how you feel about it being out in the world. We've got about 10 minutes left. If we want to maybe talk about places in terms of opportunities and courses and resources and like publishing opportunities for teens, maybe, because I was thinking about I've got a list of like places to submit to, and yeah, I mean, obviously the magazines that we edit are, we would probably plug in terms of, for me, NB Life, and you, VoiceWorks. Did you have any other sort of ones that you would suggest, or like any other opportunities and such?
I mean, on the opportunities front, definitely Toolkit's poetry is absolutely something on your radar. I think I did that last year, I believe, and that was such a generative experience. And also I was exposed to a number of just kind of texts and poems and poets that I just would never have kind of stumbled on. And that was really amazing. You get some one-on-one kind of mentoring, editorial time with your work as well, which is, usually when you're starting out, not something that's immediately available to you. Definitely would recommend that. In terms of courses, I know that there's kind of there's this culture and like potentially mythology built up around like, oh, if you want to write, you should spend, like hundreds of dollars. I mean, like maybe like 10, 15, I've definitely spent that. But, kind of courses by, whether they be by writing centers or kind of more of the online variety. I mean, like, yeah, if you're really, really clicking with kind of like the marketing material around that, like,
yeah,
I feel like you have some money put away and you want to kind of invest in that, then like, yeah, go for it. But also there are a number of kind of like getting on Twitter is not something I would really recommend for, but like also there are a number of opportunities shared around online spaces, like the Express Media Facebook page releases a list of opportunities on a monthly basis that are definitely worth checking out. And they're really kind of conscious of the fact that most people do not want to spend, like heaps of dollars on, expensive courses that may or may not pay off. So I would definitely kind of any kind of like Facebook groups. I'm actually not on Facebook, so Ray, maybe you're a little bit more qualified to.
Oh, I'm not very good with that kind of thing either. Though I do know that like there's definitely some Facebook groups and that kind of thing, Discords, and that kind of thing. And in terms of like places to maybe pitch or look at submissions, sending your work. Definitely look at places like VoiceWorks, and there's Baby Teeth Journal, Australian Poetry Journal, Scum Mag. This is me. Concrete Queers, which is a zine. Cordite. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different places out there, and as you said, like there's a lot of newsletters as well that will send out those opportunities. I think we've got about 5 minutes left. If there's anything you wanted to sort of like add or give me your final thoughts.
Well, yeah, just I guess thinking through other opportunities as well. Queensland Poetry Festival has a really great newsletter, so definitely worth signing up for them.
I'm literally in Queensland, and I'm like, oh yeah, they are the best. They're like one of the most amazing festivals. Yeah.
Yeah,
also YYWF.
YYWF as well. Fantastic. Also, EWF has a great newsletter. So, if you're not worried about kind of like receiving, and also Overland and a number of kind of literary journals collate opportunities and kind of like pop that at the bottom of, their newsletter, which I always look at. And also Subgen has a really, really fantastic list of publication opportunities open throughout, I think, the next couple of months. So, chuck a bookmark in there because they updated, I think. But I guess just in terms of, we have a really kind of like beautiful question, I think, that should you share your bad poetry? And I think like just like conceptualizing bad poetry is maybe something I would just like, want to end on as a note. Like, like if you think you've written like terrible poetry that's just so shit or bad, like, keeping in mind that's a very subjective kind of like valuation of your own work. Like, yes, absolutely. Like, I think there's just a lot of, negative affect tied to, sharing a work that may not be up to scratch for you or others, and kind of like embarrassment and maybe even shame. But yeah, totally. Like if you're up for it, like let someone pick apart your work. In fact, I'm kind of thinking that like the bad-est poetry is what should be shared and not the good-est. Because if you've written something I think /know is good and then you're having that, you definitely don't get as much out of that experience as you do from kind of totally like having your piece torn apart by other people, like, which is actually a really fantastic experience.
And I think, also, on that note, like in terms of like subjectivity, like, if there is a note to end on, like in terms of what is bad poetry, a lot of the times that is subjective, and it's often, honestly, at the heart of it, just incredibly racist or incredibly homophobic, and transphobic, like a lot of the times. What is considered bad poetry, especially within Australia, is poetry by people of color, is poetry by queers, by trans people, and that's just like incredibly incorrect. And your poetry is amazing. So if you fall into one of those marginalized groups, so I think that a lot of poetry that is considered bad, it is a subjective idea, and often just a really racist one. I don't know. That's my final thoughts.
Yeah.
Is that your poetry is possibly not bad. It's just that some white person doesn't think that it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So true. So true. Find the communities you want to be in. Find the people you look up to, and just totally throw yourself into that. Nobody else's opinion matters if you don't want it to.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think that's basically it. Thank you, everyone in the chat. That we had so many questions, and if there's one that we didn't answer that I didn't see, then definitely contact us. I think we're both on various social medias, or shoot us an email. Just let us know. Thank you so much for joining me, Lou. This was really, really great. I could talk about poetry all afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ray. And also, buy Ray's poetry. Milk Teeth is like the best book of poetry written like ever. So good, so good, so good. You got to get it.
Your poetry is also good. Yes, this is what you should do with your peers. Tell them how good they are.
Exactly.
I love it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and read each other's work and uplift your peers, because we're all in this together. All right. Bye. Thank you.
Everybody.